Let's talk TIFs in Woodstock. Are there any questions up to this point about the material? Yeah.
Just quickly, I want to understand the money that's coming out of the actual, you say that they have this many cents that's supposed to go toward education, for instance, but if it's being stolen and it's not going to education and it's in that billion figure,
Right.
How is that happening?
Right, so, yeah, great question. So, like you said, the annual report for the city says that for every dollar that's collected, it should be 67 cents. Except, what about that TIF? Well, we're gonna factor that in a second. But you're right. When a TIF is in town, these numbers must be adjusted for the TIF takings.
So they're skimming off each one of those?
They are. They're taking their money first. And then the school will get 67% of what's left.
Can I?
Yeah. Sure.
I'm sitting here getting very frustrated. I've been in community development. I'm not currently in community development.
Okay.
But I've worked with TIF districts.
Okay.
I do agree that some of these locations that they call blighted, that are farm fields and things like that, the developers end up getting money back, that's going above and beyond. But a TIF, what it's established for, is an area that will not increase any tax in that area unless investment comes there. You've seen areas that are downtrodden and buildings that are boarded up and downtowns that look like crap. And then these kinds of things allow people to make an investment, and then that amount that is increased is by that investment, those tax dollars then go back to the district to continue infrastructure improvements and then continue to grow more investment. It's a positive thing if it's used properly. I think it's gone above and beyond as far as the way some municipalities have used it. Another thing you mentioned is that municipalities are paid from property tax. That is not always the case. The municipality I was working for did not collect property taxes. The taxing bodies do, but they thrived, or they were funded through the retail tax dollars.
Okay.
So there are communities that do not collect.
Okay, fair enough.
And those monies are reinvested so that there's a road there for that next building to be built, or the plumbing, or the underground infrastructure is there. So another company can come in and create jobs and bring more investment into the community. It's a very positive thing. I'm having a hard time with this.
Well, yes, I mean, as you say, the idea has merit, but I'm reporting on what it is. You can decide if it's working for you or not. The experiences that I've had is the opposite of your dialogue, but that is the defense of TIFs, that it's used for blighted areas, and the question is, what is blight?
But
So
you're calling it skimming. It's not skimming because those dollars would not be an additional investment in this area.
well, the response is your area, depending on what you're talking about, could be growing anyway. And so the rebuttal to that argument is you are mistaking coincidence for causality. And the professors that I've talked to, which have studied this issue extensively, tells us that communities that have TIFs compared to communities that don't have TIFs, it's a wash, and in some cases they do worse than communities without TIFs. So in the case of Chicago, the people who defend TIFs say, look at the West Loop, it's going crazy, and it's heavily TIFed. Well, they're mistaking a coincidence for causality. The West Loop is hot, and the TIFs are still there. So the TIFs are still funding developers in a red-hot community. So are there instances in the worlds of economic development where a TIF is really did what it was supposed to do? I'm quite sure. But you guys need to understand all the factors to be able to weigh in and say whether you think it's a fair trade-off. Because it is, when the TIF is collecting money, it is diverting funds from these entities. And that,
it's not, if those extra tax dollars would not be generated because of the blight.
well, we can't go back in time. See, this is a problem that the professors tell us. You can't go back in time and have the same community with the TIF and without and say, well, look, see, here it is 20 years later, the community is shit. So you were right to have had that TIF. So let's go back in time and put the TIF, you can't do it. So if you do have a part of your city that is, like you say, with boarded up, the public conversation has to be, and everyone needs to weigh in, including the parents, is this a good use of public money?
And that's what they do, that board that you talked about, that joint review board, is every one of those entities around the table discussing the TIF and what it means to the increase
Yeah.
at the end of that time frame.
Yeah,
I have a question. Did California abandon?
they did.
And
Yeah.
so they dropped it.
They did. They started and they dropped it.
Started it?
They
and
did.
dropped
Jerry
it.
Brown came in and there was a court case, but they ended the TIFs and the money went back into the treasury and it really helped them out. But yeah, there's a situation where there was a huge, huge economic player in the state of California.
Okay. Can we use that as part of your statement, if I understand correctly, that you can't do anything on a state level? Is that true? California apparently did.
Well, but they passed the law, in the State House to end TIFs. So the enabling statute is at the state level. In the city, like in the city of Chicago, if the city council had the majority vote, they could sunset all their TIFs. They couldn't sunset your TIFs. They couldn't sunset like Evanston TIFs. But the city council has the power to control its own little world. But if the governor got it into his head, like Governor Brown did, that TIFs are bad across the whole state, and he could convince a majority of your legislators, as Brown did, then they could kill all the TIFs across the state, just like that. Yeah.
So on our tax bill, we don't have any information telling us.
Well, that's another question. Now, if you live in the TIF district, we're going to get to the specifics of your TIF in a minute, but if you live in the TIF district, that's the question. Does it say downtown TIF on your tax bill? In Chicago, in Illinois, or I should say rather in Cook County, up until last summer, it did not. So the tax bills in Cook County were lying to people for eternity. So you would see in the county of Cook, you'd see a tax bill from someone who lived in a TIF. You'd see the name of the TIF. And I remember in Chicago, there's 150. In Exurban Cook County, there's another 220. So there's like about 440 TIFs in the whole county of Cook. So if you lived in one of those TIFs, you'd see the name of the TIF, like Kinsey TIF District, and then a zero. So it would be like, well, what is that? So I never heard of a TIF, but I apparently am in one, but what's the difference? It says zero. So in other words, next to all these numbers, where it said school board getting so much and library getting so much, there'd be TIF with zero. That changed as of last July when Cook County Clerk David Orr put the real numbers on. And so you saw they went down. So when you were if you're living in a TIF district, last year you were giving $1,000 to your units of government, and the schools were getting $600. That was right there on your bill. This year, you look at your same bill, you realize that TIF district that was taking zero, it's taking 90%. And that's true for over 21 TIF districts in the city. So now that 1,000 said $900 to TIF, and 50% of 100 would be $50 to the Board of Ed. So that's a major difference on a tax bill.
And so some people can have several TIFs on their tax bill.
Well, there's only,
No, is it
no,
only
your
just
your
one?
property is geolocational, so the TIFs do not overlap, so
Okay.
you're either in one or not. Now, if you own more than one property, you could be. If you have TIFs present, the taxing bodies understand this, and it creeps your rates up. And as I mentioned in Cook County, it's an impact of 11%. So one way to think about TIFs, at least in Cook County, is if you made them all go away, I get 11% more in my pocket. And I don't know about you, but
Yeah. it's a lot.
my property tax bill is pretty steep, So I got a townhouse in Lincoln Park, so good for me. Well, if you go back 10 years, 11% times, that's a new car, that's a new house, that's send my kid to college. I mean, it's very considerable. And again, that's not a conversation that we have. So at the end of the TIF, now a TIF can be ended prematurely. by the will of the mayor, which happened in Chicago because the TIF that was in the loop was so controversial that Mayor Daley canceled it beforehand, and then you have a pot of money. So one solution is you disperse the money that's left in the TIF back to the units of government that would have gotten it anyway, according to this distribution. So it's like a one-time gift. So if there's $1,000 in the pot, then your schools would have gotten like $670 or something like that. So that's how it would work. But the mayor can also put some other rules on it. So in Chicago, they put another rule on top of all this, and it was like a 20% rule. They just said, if that happened, if that $1,000 became available, we're only taking $200 of it and distributing it. The other 800 we're holding. And they just made that rule up. So again, depends on how your government works. Okay. These are great questions. I really appreciate it. So let's try to get a little particular now. In Woodstock, we have the downtown TIF that was created in 1997 and is set to expire in 2020. I hear that maybe some talk of extending it? So that's kind of on the table. All right, in which case it could go to 2032. So here's the boundaries. This is from the original planning document that was from the 1997. And so you see this location with some of these other landmarks down here. So this TIF has captured $6,101,201 through 2014. So that's how much money TIF District 1 has captured, $6,100,000. It's spent $9,100,000. So it's taken in 6 and spent 9. There's 2 series of bonds that I could see in 2 different years, series D, E, and G. So far you've spent about $2.3 million on financing to the UMB Bank because of that indebtedness. You spent $1 million on the Woodstock Station project. You spent $3 million on public infrastructure, which is everything from roads, traffic lights, other things. You purchased 409 Clay Street from William Saws for $437,000 in 2003. And at the beginning of this year, you had $912,714 left in your TIF account. So you owe, obviously. This TIF owes. And this is typical because back in the day when the TIF was created, there was some thoughts to have various projects, like maybe we're going to improve the town square, or we're going to redo the Opera House, or maybe, there must have been a lot of plans floating around. But one plan did come through, and that was for the, yeah, so this is, remember we said it was about 60% for your schools. So 60% of $6 million is $3.6 million. So you could argue, it seems to me, that your school district 200 has been deprived of $3.7 million by this TIF. It's money that seems to me they should have gotten. Now, I know the point I wanted to make to this gentleman. When you're talking about school units of government accommodating each other, often what happens is when a TIF is being proposed, the mayor or the city manager will go to the school superintendent and say, look, I got this great plan for whatever, and we're going to put a TIF in, but let's make a deal. Don't pee in my lemonade. Don't make a fuss over this, and I will make you whole. I will give you some money around the side. And so you have sort of many extracurricular deals made between these 2 units of government, the village mayor and the school superintendent or the school district, but it's not as much money as the school district would have gotten without the TIF, but it's more money than the district would have gotten had they not made the deal. And these deals are also made in the dead of the afternoon, and I think that they should also be exposed and discussed, because again, it's the taxpayers and the parents that are in this fight or in this mix or transaction, if you want to talk about it as a civic transaction. Deals are being done that you don't know about. All right, so this is what's the impact of the TIF that you have here. These are the costs that I have here. So you can just see every year, going back to as far back as we go. We don't actually have the first few years of documentation, but I'm going to say they were probably all zeros. So when the TIF district started actually spitting off money, as you see every year, this is how much the TIF generated, and this is the current balance. These are the expenditures every year. Now, the project that we did roll the dice on is the Woodstock Station. How did that work out for you? So this was this was the site of the old factory, right? That was very famous, and was part of your history here, and they tore it down some years ago, and created. I think part of the reason why the TIF was created possibly was to get something going here. So what happened? The project was developed by Bob Hummel of Hummel Group from Palatine. The city sold the land to him for $500,000. The TIF was used to clean up the spot because it was pretty dirty. Lay down infrastructure. So we have these things. You got to make sure there's a sewer line and things of this kind. It was supposed to include 59 townhomes and about 150 or so condos, plus a 60,000-foot retail. And 10 townhomes were built. And in 2009, it was foreclosed. This unit right now is listing for about $250,000, one of them. But the Barrington Bank walked away with this whole thing for $1.25 million. So here we have another one of these consequences of this whole TIF situation. You guys acted as the bankers for the developer, this guy.
Yep.
Now, to the point of, was this was like a ruined building, no one was using, so this was blighted, I guess you could say, like it was a factory. So this is the TIF saying, maybe this is the TIF at its best, perhaps.
Yeah.
What are we going to do with this thing? It's a polluted place. It's an icky place. It's wearing us down. It makes Woodstock look like a slum. Blah blah blah. There's it's sad to see because it used to be great and now it's sad. So, what are we going to do with it? So it's a very good knotty question. So let's make a TIF. And Bob comes along. And he says, here, look, these are beautiful. And he shows these plans, and I'm sure there was a city council meeting where people looked at these plans and went, ooh, and the drawings for the retail. Oh, there's gonna be a Starbucks. So, okay, let's roll the dice. Well, it didn't work out. You're stuck with the bonds. You got to pay them back. UMB Bank is not going away. The notes that you took to make all this happen is present, and it's a debt that you are responsible for. Now, what happened to this guy? I tried to find him. I couldn't. Maybe you guys know where he is, or he's had other projects.
Yeah, he's working on another TIF.
He's working on another TIF. Yes, sir.
He used to be a village manager or an assistant village manager in California. No, he didn't.
Okay. So he's known to you. He's known to some of you. So anyway, there was a big legal proceeding. The judgment was against him, and so he's out of the picture. Now comes the Bank of Barrington. What? Whatever they are, whoever owns the Bank of Barrington now is calling the shots on this. So I'd say they got a deal.
Oh, yeah.
They got a great deal, courtesy of you. Now, when the court settled this, and they sorted all the debts and the obligations, and they sort of wiped the slate clean, I guess, at the end of the court situation. Bob, he goes away. His hands are clean. He doesn't owe anything, right? He's passed over the property to the bank. Now they're the title holder. They can build whatever they want there, right? It's clean. It's remediated. So they got a deal. Did you get any of this money? Were you at the table? No. Now, that's an unfortunate situation, but suppose it had gone the other way. Suppose Suppose this had been super duper famous and fantastic, and that every one of these would have been a townhouse, and there's your mall with the Starbucks. Suppose that had happened, and this guy Bob sells it not for a loss, but suppose he sells it for 10 million. Do you get any of that? No. So this is another one of the kind of unsung stories of TIFs. And this happens over and over again. You act as a banker, like a silent partner for developers, who then flip the properties and they walk away with profit, including the money you gave them. Now you can say, well, that's a fair return. Maybe that's just the game. The developer took the risk and put some of his money in, right? And you, as the city, or as the urban, or as the civic entity, put your money at play too because you wanted to see this done. That's the public good. You wanted to see this done, so you're willing to put your public money in, and then kind of adios muchachos. And his project works out, and he sells it for a huge fortune. Good for him, Bob. Now go off and build something else somewhere. Take your profits, including our money. Go with God. I don't know about you, but that makes me mad. And it happens It happens quite a lot in Chicago, and I'm not sure how often it happens in other jurisdictions. As I say, we're just moving outside of the city boundaries of Chicago. And I should say, the stories that we find in Chicago, maybe, I hope, are not indicative of how TIFs work everywhere in the state of Illinois, but we have yet to see. And as the lady pointed out, it could work out in other jurisdictions just fine. It could be all above board, and it's all working well. I haven't found any yet, but we're only just starting to look. All right. Part of what I want to tell you about is organizing around TIFs. So I'm going to give you a little more information, and then we can wrap this thing up and get to questions and answers. Nearby TIFs in the news. The Virginia Street Tax District, which is not here but is nearby, they're building these things. And that apparently aggrieved Cal so much that he put it in his blog. So he's aggravated that $64,000 of property tax money is being spent on these things. Now, where'd that come from? Who knows? But it's a small example of why TIFs are called slush funds. Why they're vulnerable to that characterization, because things get built with them and nobody can really understand why they built this. And if you want to get really down in the weeds, you would say, well, who laid the concrete? Who was the contractor that got that job? And I'm not saying that it's true, but oh my God, it's the brother of the county commissioner, or it's the nephew of the mayor or something. God forbid that should happen. Anyway, Cal is pissed off about this, so I thought you should see it. Now, not too far away from here, at Route 47 and 176, you see a blighted area, apparently, that needs a TIF in order to have something called the Chicagoland Sportsplex Incorporated to go ahead and build a sports complex there using TIF money. Now again, is that the smartest use of public money? I don't know. The people in that community, and maybe some of you are neighbors, or maybe some of you are from over that way, maybe you can have a conversation with the mayor or the planners down there as to why the guys who want to build this thing just can't build it and charge whatever they want. Put 100 tennis courts there, or skeet shooting, or whatever it is that would be in such a facility. And I have to say, the public financing of sports complexes is a huge racket. It's a huge racket all over America, whether it's a stadium like we got in Chicago, where the citizens of Chicago spent $425 million to build the spaceship that's crashed into Soldier Field, where they play, 13 games a year? Yeah. Well, that's crazy. I mean, the McCaskey family, they're gazillionaires. Well, in Chicago and cities all over America, the McCaskies and their brethren make the case to the city fathers that sports stadiums are economic drivers, and that's BS. It's not true. But it's used as an excuse to give public subsidy to the McCaskies and their friends who are building billion-dollar stadiums everywhere. And the most egregious example is in the World Cup and Olympics, where In Brazil, they put a sports stadium for $1 billion in the jungle that you can't even get to. You have to take a boat to it. But you can imagine how much money the contractors make from those projects, but usually the people lose. Well, you may have the same situation. It's not as bad as putting a stadium in the jungle. But I would look into this if I were you. I would ask some serious questions. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if that's the first plan. Other people perhaps in this room know more about it.
Mhm.
I think there is potentially low-income housing that's being proposed.
Okay, could be changed up.
Was it changed?
I don't know. This is as a result of the search I did. This is from January 2015.
That failed twice.
Huh?
That's failed twice.
It's failed. Okay. Okay. Well, it's in the news. I just wanted to bring it up because these things, that's how this thing rolls.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
I think we can request some people who do know a little bit more about this to maybe fill in. We may have a situation where there might be potentially low-income housing that would be in that particular area, and the District 200 would be responsible for educating the students, maybe for quite some extended time.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a situation that I think should be,
Okay, so that's,
people here
we can put that on the table when we get to when we conclude the presentation. Let's park that issue. So there's a potential TIF issue, and if you build housing and there's more children, the school district is going to be burdened with somebody has to teach those children, but they're going to have to do it with less money. All right, so that's in the news. Now, not too far away, School District 300 has 10 cities in it, including Crystal Lake, Algonquin, West Dundee, Carpentersville, Sleepy Hollow, etc. And they have 7 TIFs, including the Sears TIF, the famous Sears TIF that was given to them when Sears moved out of the city of Chicago. So our research discovered that those TIFs from District 300 deprived them of $17 million in 1 year. So School District 300 is the 6th largest in Illinois with 23,000 children, and they have to make do with, somehow they had to balance their books by either raising their rates or doing without. A little further away in Cook County, in an African American community called Harvey, it's a very small town, but yet they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 TIFs, and they have taken out of Harvey $35 million.
Oh my gosh.
$35 million of property taxes off the table in the village of Harvey, which is very small and not affluent.
Yes.
Now, one of the projects that was created from Harvey TIF is, again, illustrative of this deal making that I told you about. Harvey TIF number 5 sent at least $3 million to something called MSMC Investments for the renovation of St. Francis Hospital in 2011. So this was a hospital owned by the Sisters of Charity. It wasn't going very well. In fact, the sisters sold it to them for $1. Then these investors, these guys, put about $23 million into the property to spruce it up, and they rebranded it as Metro South Medical Center. So here it is, sort of with a new facade and a new branding. That happened in 2011. 4 years later, they flipped it. And these are the investors, Falcon Investors from Harrison, New York, and Transition Healthcare are these guys. Well, after that investment of $23 million, the owners flipped the hospital for $40 million. It's a profit of $17 million, or 74%. Show me how I can get 74% return, and I'm there. I take my wallet out, I'll sign my house over to you. Show me how I can get 74% return on my investment. The new owner is Franklin, Tennessee-based Community Health Systems, so they walk away with $17 million, including the $3 million given to them by the good people of Harvey. And again, Harvey folks don't even get a Band-Aid for their trouble, but these guys now are operating it, and they could flip it yet again, right? Healthcare is a going concern. These folks could keep it going and get, I'm sure they're looking to maximize their investment, and we may yet read about that. All right, let me just conclude by giving you three what I think are huge policy issues with TIFs, regardless of where they are. Number one, TIFs hoard taxes in prosperous communities. It may not be as obvious in a smaller place, like a Woodstock or a Barrington, but essentially, because TIFs are supposed to be spent in the district that they're created, by and large, it tends to handcuff money. And this slide here is of the city of Chicago that shows where TIF spending is red hot, and that's in the loop, in the West Loop. So TIFs are dumping money. TIF money is being collected and being spent in areas that are already prosperous. But areas in Chicago, notably the west sides and the south sides that are heavily African American, are starved of TIFs. So that's why I have this handcuffs here. TIF money is handcuffed. But if your city is small, this may not be that big a deal. But in a large landmass like the city of Chicago, it's anti-distributive. So taxes that are collected here have to stay here. But the need for building and infrastructure may be down there. We may need parks down here. There may be a lot of Latinos with families who need parks, but yet they can't get one because the money that's being collected here is being spent here, so we're going to have more parks there, to take an example. So I think that's an issue of equity. When you're looking at how money is spent, how you're collecting taxes, and where you're spending them in your city. Two, according to the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, that's been looking at land for decades, they say this in a book called Rethinking Property Tax Incentives for Business. They say, our message is simple. Please, please, if you're going to offer incentives, don't give them to every firm that asks. Don't. 90% of the time, they don't work, and handing them out after a company has already located in an area without them makes no sense at all. But that actually describes Chicago's TIF policy perfectly, and you hope that it doesn't describe yours. And finally, number three, school districts sue mayors, taxpayers lose twice. So what you're seeing is the deals that I've described to you sometimes go south. And the accommodations that are made sometimes by the school superintendent with the mayor don't always work out as promised. And in some cases across America, the superintendent then lawyers up and sues his mayor.
Oh,
And now you have the strange situation of the taxpayers paying both ends
yes,
of the lawsuit.
yes.
You're prosecuting and defending at the same time. And in the city of Oak Park, that's exactly what happened. School District 200 sued the village over a TIF deal gone south, and after $600,000 of legal fees, they settled out of court. It was dragged through the papers. Everybody looked really stupid. I mean, all parties looked horrible in the press. But that's a lot of library books that weren't bought.
Right.
That's a fire truck, right? I mean, who knows what $600,000 could have done for the good people of Oak Park. Sharon Pachak Lehman was a member, and is to this day a member of the D200 school board. She said, economic development is not the business of school districts. Education is. TIFs take dollars from schools. The best economic development localities can do is provide great education. When dollars from education go into these deals, the game never comes out favorably for students. So says Sharon. And unfortunately, this is a trend that's happening all over the country. So this is Oak Park schools settled TIF lawsuit, but here in South Carolina, Pickens County and School District suing city. In Ohio, the South Range District sues Salem over TIF revenues. And over in Wakanda, School District 118 is suing Lakemore over two TIFs. Now they have to be doing this for a reason. They're not frivolous lawsuits. It's because notwithstanding the accommodation that the superintendent and the mayor try to have with one another, I mean, they play golf together after all. I mean, they have lunch together. They're supposed to work together to make for a good local government. So you don't want to get in each other's gravy. But even notwithstanding, you're seeing lawsuits everywhere because somebody has decided that it's not a good deal for the schools. And so that is a policy prescription that I think you should be mindful of. That concludes my presentation, folks. I want to offer a DVD for sale later on for $10. You have a TIF 101 on here and some other helpful things that will be available for your consideration. So thank you for your patience, and I guess we'll turn it over to the chair for Q&A and further comments. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tom. Give a hand to Tom. Thank you very much.